Today's episode is brought to you by Greenman Open. In a world of market swings and geopolitical shifts, it's natural to look for investments built on something more foundational. That's the thinking behind Greenman Open, a European long-term investment fund focused on one of the most resilient sectors there is, grocery-anchored real estate. The idea is simple. However the economy fluctuates, people still need to buy food. Open invests in the essential grocery retail properties that communities rely on every day. The fund earns income from investors from the rent those tenants pay, aiming to provide a source of stable, long-term income. It's a regulated fund designed to make this type of real estate investment accessible to everyone. You can become part of Greenman Open from just €1,500, either through your financial advisor or directly with the Greenman Open app. To learn more, visit greenmanopen.com. A quick but important note, all investments carry risk. The value of your investment may go down as well as up, and you may get back less than you invest. Past performance is not a reliable guide to future performance. Hello and welcome to our last edition of Path to Power for 2025, and I'm delighted again to be joined this week by Daniel McConnell, the editor of the Business Post, and by John Lee, executive editor of the Irish Daily Mail. Thank you both very much, and Happy New Year to both of you.
Happy New Year.
I want to start today by something I meant to talk about in our last episode from the last week of the Dáil, but we can talk about it now, which is how Fine Gael, Fianna Fáil and Sinn Féin united in common cause in defeating Ruth Coppinger's bill to ban fox hunting. So we have found something which has split the unity of the left, and finally, given that Sinn Féin has been opposed, I think, to nearly everything that the government has been in favour of during the year, why is it, John, that fox hunting is something that Sinn Féin can find common cause with Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, and particularly as well when fox hunting is something that we'd associate with the Tally-Ho Brigade and for those who might be of British heritage?
The vote was pretty unanimous as well, not unanimous, but pretty weighty, 124 to 24, I seem to remember it was. So it was a big belt for the anti-fox hunting crew. I've always questioned whether Sinn Féin are actually left wing.
You've preempted what I was going to bring up.
I love it. But no. In the sense, there's certainly a huge element of their party would be anti-woke, and they would also hope to expand in rural Ireland. And I could be wrong, but the vote to support or continue fox hunting across the board with all those politicians was more about a rural Ireland issue and pursuits that would be seen as desirable or acceptable in rural Ireland in a way that perhaps they aren't in metropolitan Dublin. Ruth Coppinger was the TD who brought it forward, a left-wing, a profoundly left-wing TD, it should be remembered, of PPB.
Solidarity, she quite clearly pointed out to me the other day, she's part of the Solidarity Party.
Oh, good.
Judean People's Front versus the People's Front of Judea kind of stuff, isn't it?
Not known for donning that I don't even know the name of it, that black hat they wear and the red coat and jumping on a steeplechaser and running after a poor innocent fox. I wouldn't be a huge fan of blood sports, but nevertheless,
sorry, John, you've been writing on politics for 30 years. You're a great.
Yeah. But I wouldn't even, for instance, I wouldn't even go to a bullfight with him in Spain. I just don't. It's not my thing, and but whereas I oppose it personally, I believe in people's right to pursue traditional rural pursuits.
Yeah, how much of a tradition is it actually? How much do people in rural Ireland really believe in the fox hunting? There's a lot of farmers who don't want their land trampled on by the horses and hounds, and let's not forget, the British, who introduced this practice, this barbaric practice to Ireland, have themselves banned fox hunting well over 20 years ago in Britain.
They also introduced the beautiful game to Ireland. So if we're going to start banning everything the Brits brought in, we're in big trouble.
Yeah, I mean, it struck me when I first heard Ruth Coppinger out on this on Morning Ireland talking about it. It was like, why is a Dublin West TD, a socialist TD, taking this on?
Why not? Why not? It's a national interest. I mean, if just because you live in a metropolitan area doesn't mean you can't be interested in what goes on in our entire country.
I wouldn't have thought it's the most burning issue for the constituents of Dublin West now, you know.
Well, she has plenty to say and plenty of other issues.
She does. It strikes me as well, you might remember there was a similar sort of kind of distraction at a time of national crisis when, you know, the Fianna Fáil Greens government was falling. They were fox hunting. You know, I remember Willie O'D at the time turning, the country's going to shite and we're dealing with fucking fox hunting this week.
Would that be when Matty McGrath left Fianna Fáil?
No, slightly after it.
Yeah, but he disagreed with his...
Yeah, but I think one of the big takeaways from the presidential election, I think it's probably an interesting segue into this, was that the idea that the left can coalesce.
Yeah.
And whether or not they can actually unify for long enough to present a viable alternative to the status quo. It's quite clearly, on certain issues, they will be able to coalesce. In terms of forming a government, there's not a hope in hell, because they will, the first thing that always happens on the left is the split. We saw it already. They're not running unified candidates for the by-elections, you know, in terms of the two Dáil vacancies. So there's not a hope in hell, in my view, unless things radically change.
So does that mean that Sinn Féin, when it gets into government, if it gets into government in the next election, will not be alongside the parties of the left, but will be in coalition with one of the two main parties already in government, and more likely with Fianna Fáil?
It has been the norm since 2016 that two of the three big groups have had to coalesce to form a government. That will remain true going into the next election. So Fianna Fáil and Sinn Féin, because I just can't see it as conscionable that Fine Gael would seek a fifth consecutive term in office, given it's not in the party's interest, it's not in the national interest, I don't think, for them to be in government again. So I would think you will now hear, particularly as, you know, we get to the midterm point of this particular government, and then we're heading towards the next general election, there'll be a lot of focus, in my view, of a Fianna Fáil led Sinn Féin coalition.
And of course made easier by the fact that after the 2029 general election, we're assuming Micheál Martin will not be leader of Fianna Fáil. He was implacably opposed to doing any deals with Sinn Féin. A new leader would have less problems with doing that.
And there's an additional problem if you're looking for the very disparate left. And another way, there's the old joke that the first item on the agenda at a leftist meeting is the split. That they'll not only will they find it very difficult to agree on a programme for government, say all those left. There's only, at my last count, I did a piece in this late last year, about 65, 70 people you could refer to as left in the Dáil. Now, if they all advance their agendas in the next general election, you know, those people who voted Labour last time, would they vote Sinn Féin, thinking Sinn Féin are higher up the pecking order at this stage? So could they all increase that seat quota to have a leftist bloc? That's unlikely.
You also raised this thing about, is Sinn Féin really a left party? And I'd imagine that, you know, there will be people getting in contact with us from Sinn Féin who will argue strongly with us if we say it's not. And certainly an awful lot of the brains trust that you might say, the backroom people in Sinn Féin, would very much be of a leftist leaning. And that was very much the leadership that Gerry Adams gave for the 350 years or however long it was. He was actually the leader of the party.
He was 35, Matt.
Okay, all right. But anyway, the point being that, is Sinn Féin really at heart a populist party? And if Sinn Féin is going, at the moment, an awful lot of the opposition that it is offering against the government isn't necessarily socialist opposition, it's populist opposition. And then it's a question of finding somebody that it won't be too difficult to find a way of going even economically into partnership with Fianna Fáil or Fine Gael, because they will find common cause in populism and capitalism rather than socialism.
I've interviewed Owen Bryn, very much the brains of the operation in Sinn Féin. I mean that, and he's a very intelligent, articulate man, himself a writer of a number of books, which I've read, and I've read one of them, which is, and I paraphrase the title, but it's about the left-wing republicanism. And he makes no bones about the fact, and much as Sinn Féin might say this is not the case, that they are a populist party. That is his phrase, they're a left populist party. He would have associated with an interview I did for another podcast, a Daily Mail podcast, on Sinn Féin, From Bomb to Ballot.
How many plugs are you going to get into this?
That's what we're here
And he
for.
could have had an award-winning podcast too. One of the Irish Media
We're
Awards.
discussing capitalism. We did. Matt presented me with that prize, by the way. That award.
I also was on stage that day.
And it's won awards since. But it never got as high up as Journalist of the Year as Danny did. We'd have to get that in. But now I've lost my train of thought, thinking about glories of Sinn Féin. But he would have compared Sinn Féin to such movements as Corbynism and Syriza in Greece, which is a long way out there now for some of the centrist voters in Ireland. They take political stances. The comparison I make with Sinn Féin, and they're going to really hate this, is the Tory party in Britain. And you often hear the Tory party in Britain described as a coalition itself. And there are wings of that party that are completely opposed to each other, but they've always kept together as a party.
Well,
till recently,
it got reformed there.
So there's a huge left wing element to Sinn Féin, but there's also what could be described as somewhat of a right wing element to the party,
which makes it a sort of a modern day Fianna Fáil from the 20th century.
And there you go, and that brings us to our next step. If you watch the movement and declarations of Jim O'Callaghan in recent times, he spoke at quite a number of civil war. We discussed it before, in the War of Independence heroes that Fianna Fáil conduct during the summer, which would, to me, give him something of a green hint. He also doesn't come with that ideological baggage that Micheál Martin had constructed for himself by not going in with Sinn Féin back then and criticising them back then, I say 2020, when Sinn Féin became the largest party in Dáil Éireann. Sinn Féin lost 20% of their support, it must be remembered, in 2024. I believe that Jim O'Callaghan would do business with Sinn Féin, and that is the coalition to watch.
I think it's interesting that if you think that at 2020 there was a lot of talk about Fianna Fáil perhaps getting squeezed between the two ideological blocks of a Sinn Féin on the left and Fine Gael on the right, and they were the sort of and Jim O'Callaghan made reference to this. You know, what do we stand for? What does Fianna Fáil stand for? That position is reversed because Fine Gael are now the ones in decline, and Fianna Fáil are sort of doing slightly better. Like, in large parts, there isn't a cigarette paper between Sinn Féin and Fianna Fáil. I mean, even I remember back in 2016, there was at least a dozen, if not more, within Fianna Fáil who were quite happily, even at that point, go in and sit in coalition with government with Sinn Féin, knowing that they would be the larger party, they could control them, put manners on them. And also, I think there's a desire to stop Sinn Féin from being this noisy, populist charging from the opposition benches, get their feet dirty in government, let them make the decisions, and tarnish them with the kind of the restrictions of being in government as they've had to deal with in the north. I mean, one of the most common charges you hear in the Dáil is, hang on, you're down here talking about housing and this and that, and look at what you're doing up in the north. You're cutting welfare and etc. up in the north. So, like, there's a desire, I think, within some in Fianna Fáil to bring them into the tent and kind of neuter that sort of that populist charge from the opposition benches.
But then what would then arise as the lead force of opposition in the country? And would Fine Gael shift further to the right? When you say further to the right, are Fine Gael actually in reality a right-leaning party at all, particularly under Leo Varadkar, and even prudent Paschal Donohoe would have loosened the purse strings. That so there was an awful lot of spending engaged in by Fine Gael and government, spending of a kind that a right-wing political party probably would not have made.
There is a massive gaping hole on the right-hand side of the centre spectrum in Irish politics that used to be owned a little bit by the Progressive Democrats in terms of advocating a pro-enterprise, low taxation policy, because you have a Fine Gael that has drifted to the left. I remember I interviewed Paschal Donohoe before he departed to Washington, and just texted me there this morning to wish me well for Christmas. But he said the centre ground of Irish politics has shifted significantly post-COVID. So the demands on the political system, and it gets into this wider discussion, like, is it good for Ireland that we get into the space of conscience politics where the state is responsible for everything? Or should the state simply be an enabler to get out of the way of business, get out of the way of enterprise, make it easier for people to actually make money in this country, and let the state restrict itself to where it really should be putting its energies, which is infrastructure, transport, and elsewhere. And I think there's a real gap there in the market for that. And I don't see Fine Gael advocating that particular strategy at the moment.
The great benefit and the great positive of our electoral system, the transferable vote, PRSTV, whatever you call it, has been that it doesn't encourage extremes in Irish politics. That you, as a TD or a candidate out there canvassing in the general election, you can't go too far away from everyone else around you, or the transfers won't come your way and you won't be elected. So it has the negatives that people outside in the UK would criticise our system anytime there's any attempt, say by the Liberal Party a number of years ago, to bring it into their way of doing things, and some aspects of their electoral system do accommodate PRS-TV. That it also encourages this somewhat of a melange of incoherent parties that don't really stand for anything. But you see, when people ask what Fianna Fáil stands for and what they have stood for in the past, is they stand for getting into power, and that was not becoming too extreme on any issue. But the big issue that is going to confront Ireland in the next 2 to 3 years is immigration. And if you look to Europe, countries like Italy, who have adopted policies that 5 years ago would have been seen as far right policies, and indeed their prime minister is viewed as a far right politician. They wouldn't necessarily be frowned on by the Western world anymore. So there is certainly a space for people to take right wing stances on that particular issue. But I would never foresee a situation in Ireland under our electoral system where people seek to inhabit an extreme position and remain a large party in Leinster House.
Let's talk about immigration. Okay, let's talk about it as an issue, because are we not guilty of a large degree of hypocrisy in this country in relation to immigration, which is common throughout the European Union? You mentioned Maloney in Italy, where I think they have taken in something like 1 million immigrants over the last year through the likes of work permits. And we're in this situation as well, where we're doing the work permits thing, that we need people to come in and do jobs that we don't have enough local people for. And yet we're saying that only some of them, depending on how much they earn, are allowed to bring their family with them. That we're actually starting a system of second-class non-citizens who come in. We're happy for them to come in to do the work where we're not prepared to do for ourselves, but we're only going to give them limited rights and entitlements, which is a little bit like a system that you have in the Middle East, not far off, and the Qataris were bringing in people to build their stadiums in the World Cup and the rest of it. And we're now saying, well, we'll bring in people to do the menial jobs that we don't want to do ourselves, and we'll give you a work permit, but we'll give you very limited rights, and when we're done with you, we'll shag you out of the place as well. We have a pretty mean-minded approach. And then you're starting to hear government ministers talking more along those lines, the two most prominent of them being Jim O'Callaghan and Simon Harris.
Yeah, but let's talk real politics here. They're talking like that because opinion polls are showing that's where the public mood is. Our last poll on migration shows 3 out of 4, 72% favour a greater crackdown on migration laws. People, for right or for wrong, want to see the government tighten up on this issue. The amount of PR and like the best PR money Jim O'Callaghan has spent, and I'm talking crudely in political optics here and not about the rights or wrongs of this. The best PR money Jim O'Callaghan spent in the last 2 years was, showing those planes of people being deported like that. If you like that as a natural, that just calmed everybody down. It calmed that issue down as a political, because it was burdening up. From a business perspective, what we're getting all the time is we can't fill gaps. We have gaps all over the place we can't fill. The skill sets either not in Ireland.
Sorry, we have Peter Burke launching a tourism campaign.
Yeah.
And if you don't have foreign workers coming in, we won't have the hotels. For all the talk about, and people give out, we don't have the hotels because they're full of immigrants being used as centres, IPAS centres, which is much less the case than it used to be. But the real issue in relation to hotels is you won't get chefs, and you won't get kitchen porters, and you won't get waiting staff, and you won't get people to change the bed sheets unless they come in on work permits at low rates of pay from around the world.
What you referred to there, for instance, Matt, the people were bringing in their extended family when they were here as immigrant workers. The changes in the regulations around that were to bring us into line with the rest of Europe. And we mustn't ever forget that we have European colleagues to rely on. And much as we choose in some areas of our lives to try and put aside the fact that we have a common travel area with Britain, that is an important aspect of our immigration policy. Now, there was a figure a number of years ago where the then Minister for Justice, Helen McEntee, had said that 75% of the people applying for asylum, which is different, of course, from another time of economic migrant, official economic migrant.
And the distinction is often not made strongly enough.
No. We're coming across the border from Northern Ireland, and quite a number going the other direction. It's now up to around 90%, according to Jim O'Callaghan. That's a serious problem when you've got a common travel area, people who are coming to Britain by small boats or other means. And my colleagues in Britain were anxious to remind me recently that actually the entry into the UK is not wholly anyway near as wholly by small boat. So it's an emotive issue in Ireland, and I don't know about your families, but my father's two brothers emigrated to Australia, sought a life there that wasn't available to them in Ireland in the 1950s. My mother's family had people who went to the UK. And you know, we're all aware of the immigration wakes that occurred where people would leave. For instance, my father's two brothers never saw their parents again. We understand that without immigration, we wouldn't have had the lives for our own people that they then subsequently had. But on the other side of it, you have to live in the, as Danny pointed out, realpolitik world. And there's the greatest movement of people in the world since 1945 due to war in the Middle East and in Africa and changing climate conditions. And you can't just sit there as an outlier and not have sufficient regulations to guard your border.
We need to take a break, and we also have a microphone issue we have to address as well. So we'll come back with more Pat to Power after this break. While headlines focus on short-term market movements, some investments are built for the long haul. Greenman Open is a European long-term investment fund that takes a decades-long view, investing in a portfolio of grocery-anchored real estate across Europe. It's an investment in the steady recurring need for food, in the supermarkets and everyday need shops that perform consistently, even in challenging economic times. Open aims to offer investors a way to access this stability through a single regulated fund. Learn more at greenmanopen.com. A quick but important note: all investments carry risk. The value of your investment may go down as well as up, and you may get back less than you invest. Past performance is not a reliable guide to future performance. Welcome back to Path to Power. I have John Lee from the Irish Daily Mail, Daniel McConnell, editor of the Business Post, with us today. Don't forget as well, we have subscription editions available. Marion McKeown, Path to Power US, and on Christmas, New Year editions for subscribers, Ger Colleran and Brenda Power are discussing politics, and we'll play you a clip at the end of the show as to their discussion about tasers and the Gardaí using them. It's just one of the things they've discussed in the new edition that'll be available in a couple of days' time. But let's go back to the political year just passed and how it might impact on the year just finished. Daniel McConnell, the departure of Paschal Donohoe, we've been alluding already to spending by Fine Gael and government. His replacement by Simon Harris as Minister for Finance, who gave himself the nickname Sensible Simon already. Let's see how he lives up to that. How significant, though, do you think, is this going to be for Fine Gael in 2026? Could it be the making of Simon Harris, or could it be a major problem for him?
So Simon Harris has a fundamental problem of having to recalibrate his image to the public. The Energizer Bunny image that, you know, that got him through the first 5 or 6 months of being Taoiseach, you know, has faded. I think the appetite for that has sort of faded. I think the Canturk issue, I think, changed attitudes. You know, it was almost like it was a clarion. It was a kind of a beacon of, right, we've kind of been feeling this way a little bit. We've had enough of the Energizer Bunny bit. We need a little bit more heft here. It clears, you know, that the decision to put himself into foreign affairs was a mistake. Like, because he's positioned himself now centrally at the heart of government as the financial decision maker, but also as leader of his own party. That's something that's never happened.
Too much, isn't it?
I think it's a high risk strategy, because I would have thought from a leader's perspective, you always need a foil. You always need someone to say, listen, Paschal won't let me give you that money. I'd want to give you the money, but Paschal won't let me give it to you. So that's going to be very difficult for him to contain that demand for spending growth in areas. They're publishing their medium-term fiscal outlook today, which is basically they're committing to 6% increase, a limit of 6% increases. The only difficulty is they've no credibility here because they had a 5% limit last time round and they blew it year in, year out. Now you could say COVID, etc., like that happened, and there were exceptional circumstances, but they have repeatedly been under fire from the Irish Fiscal Advisory Council, the ESRI, the Central Bank, the new Troika, I think as Shane Coleman has described them, over their failure to contain spending. The big issue going into next year and the year after is that you've got pent-up demand in infrastructure spending and all the rest of it. Will they be able to contain that, or will they essentially blow those budgets to meet that demand? And also as well, the fundamental issue is that we are so reliant on these windfall taxes from corporation tax. If you strip those out, we're running a sizable deficit, and that deficit is to expend to over 13 billion next year.
And yet, John Lee, and again, we are going a little bit over old ground, but it is worth remembering that in the budget, there still was around a 10 billion euro, 9 to 10 billion euro giveaway, as they call it, nearly all devoted to current spending, and nothing done for taxpayers. I mean, politically, I just couldn't understand if you're saying, well, we have to rein in, we can't be spending all the surpluses, but you could have actually said less on current spending and more giving back to people. So we now have a situation whereby, well, yes, there certainly is going to be a lot of money being spent on public service pay bill. But Paschal Donohoe effectively turned around and said to people, well, you're not going to be any better off in the personal income tax system. Go back and talk to your employers about it in the private sector. So what ICTU is saying, the Irish Congress of Trade Unions, to its members is 4.8% to 6% is what you should be looking for. And a lot of businesses are going, what? This is happening at the same time as we've had an increase in the minimum wage and as we're having an increase as well in the introduction of auto-enrolment.
When Danny's talking about the text he got from Paschal Donohoe, he didn't text him back at the budget and say, I'm off, mate, because we all should have understood when that bonkers VAT cut for the hospitality sector took up the entire amount dedicated to tax changes that Paschal Donohoe was going, because it was a nakedly political move, and it would have, to me, questioned the power of the Minister for Finance at the time to dictate fiscal policy in Ireland. Paschal Donohoe, and Daniel, correct me if I'm wrong, certainly from sources close to him the previous year, had opposed that move. And Jack Chambers, the outgoing Minister for Finance, incoming Public Expenditure Minister during the general election, had absolutely taken stance against having any hospitality cut for any VAT cut for the hospitality sector. And the unified declaration prior to the general election from all ministers was, to me, when I was being briefed in advance of the 2024, which is the 2025 budget, was that you do not help a sector like that through the tax code long term. That's not how it works. And lo and behold, they bring in that tax cut for the hospitality sector, and meanwhile raise the minimum wage. And the hospitality sector, who spent the whole year, and you can go back to people like Adrian Cummins and those great representative of his sector, weren't happy with the tax cut in the end because they said we're giving it all back in the minimum wage. So that was a nakedly political move. I think
limited political benefit.
Absolutely. Who was it for? It just made it was just bonkers, and it for want of a more politically correct phrase, it was measuring egos. Where Gael had backed this measure during a general election. Peter Burke was the Minister for Enterprise and Employment, was very vocal on this measure, and we want this out of Fianna Fáil. People like Niall Collins, Fianna Fáil ministers, publicly opposed that and continue to publicly oppose that measure. It was a small group of people. Meanwhile, you and I, but far more importantly, the hard-pressed workers of Ireland got no break in their tax on the tax they give away in an atmosphere of rising prices, inflation, and all those other issues that make it so difficult to survive in a wage. What they had done in previous years for 7 or 8 years is widen that middle area those middle area tax bands to allow people's budgets, household budgets, to allow them to survive. And I could not get my head around that move.
Okay, well, of course, one of the things that they were worried about was that, we talk about windfall taxes and corporation tax. I think it's coming in about 30 billion this year in corporation taxes, that this can't go on forever. We've been told that for years. In fact, it could actually go up next year because the base rate has been increased from 12.5% to 15%, so more money coming in. And despite all the fears that we had about Trump's tariffs when they were introduced on the 2nd of April, they don't seem to have had an impact on our exports, particularly in relation to our pharmaceuticals going back to the United States. And one of the more remarkable things has been the success of the IDA under Michael Lowen as chief executive, its chair, Fergal O'Rourke, of famous political stock. I know the figure is 15,500 jobs or whatever extra. That's not necessarily the key figure, because even though those are mainly well-paid jobs, which themselves bring around lots of income tax, but basically what's more important is we've hundreds of new companies, or companies already here making additional investments to stay in Ireland. It just seems that this economic miracle that we're going through is just continuing and will continue.
Yeah, we write a lot about the IDA. We write a lot about Michael Lowen and Fergal and what they do. They're a critical agency for this country.
Yeah.
And, I think they've done a phenomenal job. And there's an agency where I've been very critical of them in the past, in previous iterations, where I don't think the taxpayer was getting great bang for its buck. I think they've had a phenomenal year. My big concern is, will the full washout impact of the tariffs kick in next year or the year after? But the pipeline
for the Americans, because the Americans have to pay the tariffs.
Yeah. The pipeline looks good at the moment.
But I think it's also extraordinary that we've been able to get all of these new jobs and companies in and the rest of it, when we have the infrastructure deficit that we have, and when we have the housing crisis that we have, that this isn't turning off those who would invest in the country.
It's not at the moment, Matt, but I think if we are 3 years down from the line from this and we're still talking major, like Metro still hasn't gotten going, the housing problem is getting worse, we do see the impact of the water capacity issues in Dublin really beginning to bite, or energy issues really beginning to bite, or that planning permissions aren't being granted because the capacity simply isn't there. That's when I think we'll start having a difficulty. Niamh Gallagher, who's the Ireland head of AWS, spoke at our National Economic Outlook Forum in the Westin Hotel.
Sorry, AWS being Amazon Web
Services, yes. Okay. So they're a massive company, big employer, all the rest of it. And they were asked this question around what do they look for in an Irish context, and she said certainty, clarity, and speed. So they want speed in terms of decision making, clarity in terms of the and they don't want an overly interventionist government where policy is changing here, there and everywhere in terms of where they would land their next base. I thought that was a critical intervention, because that gets into the minds of what these big companies want. And we're kind of failing on all those three fronts at the moment. We're chopping and changing our housing policy. We don't have clarity in terms of delivery, and certainly the capacity is a major
surely
issue.
We have to make the changes when things aren't working.
Well, of course we do. And that's why I have a lot of hope around this infrastructure, or the Accelerating Infrastructure Report, which Sean O'Driscoll and others brought forward recently enough. Like this is the clarity.
Why do you have faith? The Housing Commission report, how much of that has actually been implemented?
The housing one, I think, to me, I think the government has never treated housing. We pay a lot of lip service to housing. But Owen Murphy set out very clearly in his book, housing was never treated as the priority of the emergency that it truly is. It never got the whole of government insight. Like he said, at critical times when he was under fire as minister, it was himself and his core inner team of his 2 or 3 advisors. Like the wider government infrastructure wasn't rallying behind him. He didn't have the kind of access to government buildings or the power of government buildings to make changes. But the system is fundamentally risk averse across the board, and the thresholds for where spending is allowed are way too low from when they need to be. And this is a byproduct of the financial crash. And the Department of Public Expenditure has become known as the Department of No, slowing everything down. The spending code is overly bureaucratic. All of that needs to change. It's all identified in that Accelerating Infrastructure Task Force report. We now know, we've diagnosed the problem. We just need the treatment to come forward and come forward quickly.
I was in the UK before Christmas at our Daily Mail annual Christmas golf outing, and
tell us more.
They were all asking me about how's Ireland going, And I was said, listen, it's,
Why do they not invite columnists to go and play a bit of golf? I'm very disappointed to hear this.
You'll have to ask Lord Rothermere that. He's the boss. They were asking me, how is Ireland going? How are things there? And I'm very conscious of the fact that things aren't going well in the UK, really, economically. I was saying, listen, it's an economic miracle, but and that's what it is. But if you're a young person, if you're one of those... I was listening to a very evocative RTE report before Christmas of the plight of people down at the Capuchin Centre on Church Street, I think it is. Yeah. The thousands of people who queue up every week for a few quid. There was a discussion of how people had queued up till 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning to get a ticket to then apply the following week for a €50 voucher, which would allow them to buy their kid, and they were speaking on air, allowed them to buy their kids toys for Christmas and buy food. In tandem with this economic miracle has been an explosion in prices in the Western world. There has been a spreading of the contagion of a housing crisis throughout the Western world, and we're very inclined, and I always felt this during the crash, that we're very inclined to be insular in ourselves and believe we're the only people with a housing crisis.
Absolutely.
Every headline figure on housing is going the wrong way. This current coalition dodged a bullet in many ways in the last general election. They had promised, let us not forget, across the board, 60,000 houses a year. They're well short of that. They might actually, for the end of 2025, get somewhere near 33,000. That's way below where you need to be.
Might be lower, 2026.
And completions were diminishing, throughout last year. So housing will continue to be a problem. And I think politically, it's going to be, once again, when everyone gets over all the trouble in Fianna Fáil and presidential elections and everything else, it'll be the rock on which the coalition ship founders.
You just mentioned about being over in England. And I just wonder, we got obsessed politically over a number of years about Brexit and what it was going to do to us. And then it went ahead and the rest of it. And it's something Mary McKeown brings up in one of our American Path to Paris, which will be available over the next couple of weeks. She's raising the prospect of, could we get good news in 2026 of Britain deciding that they actually have to go back to the European Union?
Good luck with that.
Yeah, that's my feeling, is that it won't. No, you've got things like they've rejoined the Erasmus programme.
Yes.
For younger people, and that's a very important. And I think they're paying something like 650 million sterling to get back into the Erasmus programme, to give graduates or those undergraduates an opportunity to learn in Europe. And we've been enormous beneficiaries of that in Ireland as well. Her argument was that maybe this is the only way that the Labour Party can actually save itself from, okay, I know it's a long way off before the next UK election. An awful lot could happen, and Nigel Farage and the Russian-backed reform might be exposed at that stage and will not be able to take power. But it could be that Labour just have to be radical or will become redundant, and that radical thing could be bring Britain back into the European Union, or if not necessarily the European Union, at least into the single market and the common trading area and whatever, because otherwise it looks like Britain is bunched. But could it be that they will just, let the same people who walked them into the nonsense on Brexit now walk them into a reform-led country? And if they do have a reform-led country, where the hell does that leave us?
Well, again, it's something we discussed earlier. It leaves us in a tough position on immigration if 90% of applicants for asylum here are coming across the border from the UK. Things tighten up there, that increases the problem here. So again, the only land border we have with any other state is with Britain. We can never underestimate the effect that their internal affairs have upon us. We will never escape that, much as we'd like to. But to you and I as Irish people, and Danny, looking across the Irish Sea, none of what Brexit aimed to do, it's arguable they had any aims at all when they held that referendum and made any sense. And it was, and I felt, as a person who works for a company that has a base in the UK, I thought it was it was an emotionally wrenching matter when you think the EU was set up to be a peace organisation to bring together the warring nations of Europe in an economic fashion, that they would work together.
And Starmer has been working with the French and the Germans in support of Ukraine in particular, very strongly.
And I'm not an expert in anything, and I'm certainly not an expert in British politics. But when you talk to people in Westminster, as I did last month, the fact that an issue was not raised in a general election at all by any party, Brexit, as an issue. I.e. Labour did not in any way oppose it because they wanted to bring back that red wall in the north of England that Boris Johnson had successfully, much that he has critics. He's a charismatic leader who brought in working class people in the north of England who had backed Brexit. They continue to back Labour, and that step of them going back into the European Union today, as we speak, is a long, long way off.
Because I think the point of view that if you're an opponent, if you're a Jacob Rees-Mogg or Nigel Farage, what has changed in the EU since we've left? It's still very bureaucratic.
It's full of imperfections.
Yes.
Very slow for economic reform. If you look at things like the Draghi report about the need to create capital markets and reform, get efficiencies, very little has been done on that.
Just on that, actually, it's very interesting because I've been tipping away at this, in recent weeks. You speak to government ministers and you speak to kind of, those who are running the machine of government in this country. I'm hearing a frustration stroke anger around the Europe that I've never heard before. Too slow. It's too comfortable. They think that Brussels is too comfortable. They don't get it, essentially, that they go off. They have this lovely sinecure in Brussels. They don't get what's going on. The Draghi report, if a tenth of it is looked at, this was a clarion call for you. This is Ursula von der Leyen's big move to try and, lessen the bureaucracy. It hasn't happened, and this is the thing, is that, if Brussels doesn't reform, if Brussels doesn't shake itself up, you're going to have more Brexits coming down the line because this thing is teetering quite. And for an Irish government to be openly speaking like that.
But should we be throwing out the likes of the Russian supporting Hungarians and certain countries that shouldn't be in it, and then demanding more? Or could it be that, we cavil at the criticisms of J.D. Vance makes of Europe, particularly for things like suppressing free speech, which is a lot of bollocks basically, but is motivated by the ill will of his type towards European democracies. But could it be that, we still can't ignore the fact that while there's great advantage to us in having Europe as the European Union as a trading bloc, in everything else, it actually is failing to deliver.
But this is the sorry. I'll just
go on, Danny.
Quickly. Ireland, I think there's no lack of support, or there may have been only very minority opposition to the idea of joining an economic union. All these tensions that have grown up around this concept of ever closer union, political union, financial union, all the rest of it. That's where we're getting into difficulty, and that's where I think the project can run, and that's where I think it's becoming overly bureaucratic and overly slow. Look at growth rates across Europe; it's floundering. Ireland is an outlier massively. Even without our kind of corporate tax rates, we're an outlier in Europe. The project is
only
not
because we have the access to the European market.
Listen. This is not a binary choice. This is not. But Europe does need to change, and Europe does need to improve, or there will be further Brexits coming.
Yeah, but also look at how badly Britain has done since it left the European Union.
Look, I'm not saying any of this is straightforward,
and yet we also have the likes of the Elon Musks and the Peter Thiels and J.D. Vances who would like to break up the European Union. Probably because the European Union actually does try and put limits and regulates the things that they would do that they can get away with elsewhere.
The potential for Europe to be a real world power are huge. As a bulwark against a Trump America, against Russia, against China, its potential is significant. It's just not being exercised. It's floundering. The malaise is just, it's in a, we give out about the slow delivery of stuff here, but Brussels is that on kind of steroids.
Actually, just a few things to finish off. Right? I remember you writing a piece years ago, John.
Oh, God.
Right? I know when Trump went to Doonbeg.
Yeah.
And you managed to get yourself into the clubhouse, didn't you, the day before? You actually managed to get yourself around the golf on the course, didn't
Well,
you?
the best stories are always about the person,
neckery of John
the person
Lee.
who's writing it, because
Sorry, the reason I bring this up is because I wonder, will he come back when the Irish Open has been played in Doonbeg?
well,
in
I also broke
2026?
my Trump contacts allowed me to break the story late last year that Doonbeg in County Clare, wonderful golf course, very similar in its layout and design to, I discussed this with Donald Trump over dinner, to my own home course, the Island Golf Club in North County Dublin.
That's the most shameless bit of name dropping
Well, I was told
ever on Pat to
I was
Don't worry, there's
told-
picture evidence of it as well.
I was told, sorry, just to say that they're getting the Irish Open. That was the story that was broke. I was told, I was advised by people around him, talk golf with Trump. He's no interest in anything else, really. He doesn't talk politics, really, in private and anything else. And what happened that day, I'll put it up online, that story, because it was fun. I realised he was going to we was released. I actually broke the story that he was going to Clare to visit his golf course while he was at the 75th anniversary of D-Day. Well, I tell this.
Come on.
At the 75th anniversary of the D-Day events, and Trump flew in Marine One to the UK, and he flew to the beaches of Normandy from his base in Clare. So I phoned the pro in Doonbeg, and I said, listen, I was looking for a game of golf around the time, blah, blah, blah. And this guy, his name was Brian Shaw, I think, used to live in my hometown, Malahide. I said, oh yeah, we'll sort you out. When were you thinking of playing? Well, I was thinking the day that Donald Trump happens to be there. Is that possible? Because I know John Deasy is invited down as the what was it? He was envoy to the United States at the time, and he'll be there to meet Donald Trump. I'm sure he wouldn't mind playing golf that day. So I completely wangled my way in, and DC was dragged along to play golf. A very, very noted golfer in golf circles, and we played golf. We had our so that got me past the cordon. We had our golf bags searched on the 18th tee by a Secret Service guy who walked up the fairway with us, a lovely fella from Florida. And we went in and had lunch, and then DC's heading off. He says, "What are you doing?" Sure, I'll just hang around here, I suppose, and have a look at the architecture. And I was there for a few hours. The next thing, what was her name? Kellyanne Conway was standing beside me at the bar, and all the bigwigs from the Trump administration. Jeez, this is gas. And then I look out the window. Marine One is flying over the golf course, and he lands and comes in and sits down for dinner. And DC arrived and goes, "What the hell are you doing here?" I said, "No one threw me out, I just hung around." He says, "Oh, come on, you better go over and say hello to Mick Mulvaney," who I kind of knew, who was the chief of staff. And Mulvaney looked at me and goes, "How'd you get on to?" "Oh, yeah, we discussed golf. Mick Mulvaney's a member of the Hinch golf course." I says, "Do you want to have dinner with the president?" So I said, "Okay, fair enough." So I sat down and had dinner.
And what sort of company was he?
He's a businessman, and people who may appear, as you guys know, and you've interacted with many world leaders, I'm sure, in your careers, who may appear as ogres in public, haven't gotten to where they are, particularly in Trump's case, gotten to where he got in business by being some kind of ogre in private. So he's, and I'm not tall. I'd met him before. He's a physically imposing man. He's broad-shouldered. He looms over you, has a big 100-watt smile. The teeth are wonderful. And as I said, I'd been advised to speak to him about golf, so I spoke to him about the golf course, and he was enthused. He's known as a man who puts an awful lot of money into his golf courses. By my enthusiasm for his golf course, who with similar.
So you adopted the Keir Starmer approach of fawning in front of
No, well, sure, listen, I'm in a fella's golf clubhouse. But where I messed up, right? This could go on forever because it was fun.
This is fine.
Mulvaney said to me over dinner then later on, he said, "Do you want to play golf with the president tomorrow?" And I went, "Oh, yeah, okay, lovely." So I'd been over speaking to him. He was sitting there with Melania, and I said, "Yeah, great. Oh, that's fantastic. I'll play golf tomorrow, so that's fine." And then I was getting up to leave around 12:30, and Mick goes, "Listen, there's been a change of plans tomorrow. I'm afraid there's no room for you to play golf." So the lesson there is walk over, take out your dictaphone, sit down, go, "Give me an interview," because I didn't get the official interview, because I thought I was playing golf with them the next day. Never happened.
Okay. Well,
Melania sat there the whole way through dinner, with her sunglasses on. She wasn't
Well, she
interacting
is
much.
Bono.
Pardon?
Do you think she was Bono or something?
She's famous, that's for sure.
Well, John's being very modest here, but that was part 2 of his Trump escapades where he managed to wangle your way into the Speaker's dinner at Capitol Hill. He managed to, the cordon kicked everybody out, but John, given his officious look, he managed to stay in the room while Trump...
You've some neck, haven't you?
The lesson is just stay standing where you are till someone moves you.
Yeah.
And they didn't on that occasion, so I stayed behind for the
But
lunch.
with Trump, though, did he listen to you? When he was probably interested in listening to you talking about his golf course. But other than that, does he listen to people, or is he just hold forth all the time?
If you look at I was in the White House this year for the Taoiseach's visit, Micheál Martin, and in the past we had gone into, and I've covered a number of presidents too. What is known as the spray with Barack Obama, George Bush, Joe Biden, where if you were lucky, you got 2 questions. And the question usually was,
Come to Ireland.
you come to Ireland, Mr. President, and what's your favourite colour, whatever. And you were thrown out. Press, leave. That's the big shout from the press handlers. We were an hour with Trump this time, and I swear to you, you're running out of stuff to ask him. But it's all performative. And what we see on cameras and what we hear from Donald Trump is a performance. At one point, he used this phrase, Obama gave them blankets and Trump gave them javelins, which was referring to Ukraine, I think it was. And Biden gave them blankets and I gave them javelins. And it bombed. There was no laugh. And I could see him going, oh yeah, it didn't work again. And about half an hour later, he came back and used the same line again. So everything is performative for social media, for TV, to create viral clips that get sent out to his reporters and show the president doing something controversial, and on you move. But there's no substance to any of it.
Did you like him?
You don't ever get close enough to politicians, and I would say that about
did
Irish.
you find him likeable? So on the time when you actually had the chat with him,
absolutely, in person you do. Of course, he has the star quality that makes him an attractive figure. But if you always have to separate the individual from what they stand for politically, and I find everything he stands for odious. And I can't even now when I'm sitting in front of the TV, doom scrolling through my phone, I can't even watch Trump anymore. I find the man repulsive.
Yeah, so you got in.
The politician repulsive.
I didn't get into Doonbeg the one time I was trying to get in there, which was back, nearly 9 years ago now at this stage. We made a documentary for Virgin Media, I think it was even TV3 in those days, Trump versus Ireland. It was done in March, around the time of Enda Kenny going across, first time going in. And Enda Kenny did very well that time.
He did. He made the immigrants, he made the speech.
But he did it in a very subtle way and handled it very well. And we made the documentary between over in the States, spoke to an awful lot of Irish people who were terrified that they were going to get run out, the type of stuff that's happening now with ICE in places like Yonkers and whatever. And but we also went down to film in Doonbeg, and we went down, and this was in the early days of having drones available for filming. Nobody was really doing this, and Ken O'Mahony, who was doing the filming for us, sent up a drone, and we got some terrific shots up around. But while we were on the beach doing the filming, the Gardaí approached us and told us we had to leave. Right? But we had to leave. Why? Stuff. As it turned out, Eric was arriving at the same time for an event in Doonbeg. And I left Kieran O'Hara, my producer, to deal with it. And he agreed then reluctantly to leave the beach. And I was going, we shouldn't have left. This is public property. The Gardaí can't be telling us to leave a beach just because it's beside Doonbeg golf course. So anyway, I left as I had to go back to Dublin to do the programme. So the lads decided that afternoon again to get more footage. And they sent the drone up again. And suddenly the drone started getting knocked back. There was some sort of force field came into place.
Wow.
And the drone couldn't fly over Doonbeg.
Did Eric Trump have, this might be a silly question, did he have Secret Service protection at the time?
Yeah.
Like they would have physically removed you from the beach if you hadn't complied with the Gardaí's requests.
Yeah.
I mean, that day I went into the Doonbeg. There was a security cordon, I think, of nearly 10 miles around the place. There was up to 3,000 troops Gardaí and Secret Service people protecting one man. It's insane.
Although Eric Trump didn't have any role in the regime at the time.
No, nobody got protection, as the wider family do.
Yeah.
You know, there's no, and it's an amazing distinction between our government and their government, where, you know, there's headline pieces before Christmas about us getting a new government jet. If you remember back,
long overdue,
which was just in, well, listen, I don't think it was a wise move at the time. We removed state cars from our ministers and then realised they performed a very important security function, and they've been reinstated. But there's none of that, and this is seen as a public debate here. The amount of money that's spent on security here, and with the breaches in security we had around our government last year, this indicates that we need it. There is none of that debate in the United States that the American president would take Air Force One for a trip of 100 miles
to play golf.
It's
costing
a convoy to play golf.
Yeah, exactly. Him going off to play golf at the weekend is costing the American state millions every year.
And no question about it.
Like,
there is some people who do question it.
But guys, they've had a number of presidents assassinated, and you know, I mean, there's a reason why, and like, given the prevalence of guns in America, I mean, there's a reason why the level of security is there. We don't have it in this country, but I remember a similar story when Bill Clinton was in Dublin, and we're outside he was staying in the Clarence Hotel, you know, owned by U2, and the Secret Service were clearing a cordon, and it was a busy Saturday. It was kind of winter time, a busy Saturday, and a few of the natives, so to speak, were saying to the Secret, "This is our fucking pathway. You can't be blocking us. You fuck up." And I said, "Sir," you know, quite like almost hinting, but it just goes to show they
was
don't.
Was he still president at that
No,
time?
he was a former president at that stage.
Yeah, because I'll give you another example of that. And it was one day, and it was in Fitzwilliam Square, where Tony O'Reilly had a house in Fitzwilliam Square when he was the main man in independent news and media. And he had a lunch for Bill Clinton in the house, to which a number of us were invited. There was about a dozen of us invited as newspaper editors. And we had the lunch with Clinton, who turned up well over an hour late, because I think he'd been on the piss with Bono and Gavin and stuff down in Dromoland Castle the night before. So we're all hanging around waiting, and eventually Clinton arrives, and Clinton is grey as a ghost, clearly from the hangover that he was on. And I don't think his health has been brilliant over the years because of the way he carries on. And then Clinton did his thing, utterly charming. I mean, genuine charisma when you meet and stuff. So when he finished the lunch and he left the room, he went out into Fitzwilliam Square, and he started hanging around outside his car, and people started coming out from all the offices on Fitzwilliam Square. And suddenly there were 10 or 20 people around him, and he's shaking hands, and you could see the nerves of the Secret Service. And then suddenly hundreds of people started emerging from all day and literally swamping him. And it was like, he was like delighted. It was like he electrified himself, electrified the crowd, but you could see how terrified the Secret Service were. And then you got to remember, when Joe Biden came here as vice president there, I ran into Joe Biden at the top of Grafton Street, just completely by. He was literally walking around the corner with a couple of Secret Service guys, and he just started flashing the 100-watt smile at everybody. Yeah. And he had no idea who it was, smiles me, because I literally just came around the corner, oh, Jesus, Joe Biden. And Joe Biden said, hi, or everything, and then wanders on. Limited security, a different Trump era.
I felt in March of last year that there was a completely different atmosphere I'd been to all 4 of the Taoiseach's visits to Washington in the previous Trump incumbency, and I felt there was a real downgrading of the atmosphere in there. The Secret Service were much more aggressive.
It was the 12th of March this time round, wasn't it?
Yeah.
On the 17th of March, Conor McGregor got it.
Yeah.
That tells you. And I think it's going to be very interesting to see what happens next March. And then something I've discussed as well with Marion among the US things, what happens if and when Ireland get to the World Cup and we have loads of Irish people who want to go over for the one game we'd have in Atlanta if we were to be in the group phase.
And the great problem you have if you're Micheál Martin and you're Taoiseach visiting Donald Trump is you've had one universally acclaimed in Ireland successful visit to the White House. What's the chances that happened twice in a row with this guy? He's so erratic and becoming even more erratic. It's and as I say, that whole experience was was illustrated to me as performative. If on the day he snaps his fingers and he decides, right, I'm going to go for this guy, it suits what I want to do.
Yeah.
But if Jim O'Callaghan went, he wouldn't be able to intimidate Jim O'Callaghan because Jim O'Callaghan's even bigger than him.
Former Leinster rugby player.
Yeah, I'm sure he's well used to the push and pull and drag of it. But it does raise it. John makes a very fair point. There were the nervousness going into the White House trip this time around. We were vulnerable on the pharma. It was in the wake of in the context of all the pharma
But that
stuff.
was before the tariffs were announced.
So, but like there is a vulnerability. Like it's a high wire act for Micheál Martin or any teachers going to that Oval Office with someone like Donald Trump.
Before we finish, we have another clip to play. This is a little bit of Ger Colleran and Brenda Parr in the forthcoming subscriber edition, where they're debating taser guns been given to Gardaí.
To have this given to them now, a taser. We don't, there'll be guidelines about this and that and the other. But at the end of the day, people will see that we are moving towards an armed police force. Step by step, gradually.
Are you against the taser, so are you?
I have deep concerns about it. And I mean, guards overreach all the time. They always overreach a certain element within the Garda force. And I've no doubt that there will be problems with this.
There are something like 1,300 guards have been assaulted in the course of their duty.
We've no idea
in the
of the breakdown of those.
years.
We've no idea of the scale.
Your job, or Matt's job, or my job, doesn't involve the risk when you get up and get dressed and go out to work in the morning of being attacked, knifed, beaten, run down with a car. You don't rammed. You don't have that risk. And I actually do think that the tasers are a good idea. I think they're an essential in that climate.
That's part of the discussion between Brenda Parr and Ger Colleran on the subscriber edition of Pat to Power. For now, I'd like to thank John Lee and Daniel McConnell for all the work they've done in recent months, and I'm looking forward to having you regularly with us on Pat to Power in the new year. Thank you to my production team, Tom McAuliffe, and also Aidan Power. From me, Matt Cooper, thank you very much for being with us. Don't forget, pat2powerpodcast.com is where you can go if you want to subscribe or if you want to gift a subscription to somebody for the new year. Until the next time, thank you.